Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined. Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined.
All right, welcome. I am nothing but, if not punctual on starting these. Welcome everybody in. Sorry it's been so long. Holidays happen, although last season, if I remember right, I didn't get a huge stream count myself, so I'll try to be better about it. There certainly is some juicy topics to talk about tonight based on kind of where we are in the marketplace, how claimers are operating or not operating, what the heck goes into a benchmark, what our stable's been up to, and then maybe a look ahead at where things will be in breeding here mid-January. We'll get the esteemable Mr. B eventually here. He wanted to let me rant a little bit, get some hot air out, see how Sober Stens does on stream. before he wades his toes in. And I know he's got some thoughts on the schedule, so we'll probably review that part together for sure. But if I share my screen here, so far, for the season we're in, what's that, season 10? It's gone relatively well. Let me get rid of the banner. You can tell I'm rusty. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Daddy. It's gone pretty well. We're nowhere to be found on the top 10 stables for the season. Sorry. How far are we off? 2.2. Lahala is at 2.29. Shout out to Lahala. I go to my stable. I go to stable stats for the season. We're only at 1.7, and we've got what I would consider, at least for us, a pretty massive Derby loss, obviously completely offset and a little bit above that on the Crown gifts. So it has been pretty good. I'll say from my standpoint, or in my defense, the Derby loss came early and heavy in the 3-4 day period there where we had some buco entry fees, and the Crown being tiered the way it is on particularly claimers, but that wasn't our issue. Just large fields, and a lot of what we're running is S minuses this time around. We made a conscious decision to breed with Blood Moon one more time, which is Eddie's S minus LTS. We bred with Persian Bull that left Dirt Firm. That's a S minus out of OIB stable. We did take 2 S's to One-Eyed Blind the horse, including Swift Sapphire, which wasn't our own. We'd had the wound for that. And then at Right Turf Firm, we had another crop from Mercury, which is our S minus. That has put out good results, but in large part, the S's that we created for this racing season just barely ticked up over S, but we have some really solid S minuses. So we maybe raced pretty aggressively for the first week in those high entry fees. We're afraid of those, and have been slowly but steadily maybe digging our way out of a hole. One thing I've always thought that the team could help us with on this screen is this always includes pending entry fees. Most stables would say, well, pending entry fees aren't going to really change your number that much, but at any given time, our pending entry fees are probably we're racing 40 horses at this point, I think, or just under 40, so it's over 100,000 Derby that we can't show any winnings from, but we certainly won't get skunked on those. So again, small thing, but could be a big improvement for visibility. While I'm thinking of it for visibility stake and tracking stables, I've started to socialize my experience with the game to a lot of friends and family. And we had what seemed like a pretty good addition in the form of notifications regarding horses. I don't know if email notifications is always the best format, but it works. But I personally don't know that I need an email notification for when my horse is going to race. I can go to the races tab and do my upcoming. If I want to make an alert, I can certainly do that. And I know they allowed us to turn them off, but my point on that is they should allow us to turn them on for horses we sold to someone else that we want to keep tabs on. Or if we have friends and family that we talked over the holiday season about this game to, they're not going to buy a horse, but they want to keep tabs on what we're up to, see if our progress is improving or if we're regressing like we maybe did here in Derby earnings. It might be helpful to allow them to select some favorite horses or select favorite stables where they can, if they select us as a favorite stable, when they go to the races, my upcoming tab, they see the same thing I see. I get that can be a little tricky when it comes to knowing which horses are in which races, and the team is trying to kind of protect that a little bit, but some way for some people to follow along would be, I think, super useful. Let's see how we did here. We'll talk a lot about claimers, maybe before, maybe with, maybe after Mr. B joins, but I'm curious. This is a horse that's actually been pretty successful for our 2-year-olds. 4, 1, and 0 in 10 starts. Good preferences. One thing I've noticed a lot of, and I think this might be, or this is not an example. We did get sloppy here. More recently, I've seen a ton of races that have been either 100% or 0% forecasted and have ended up being yielding. So I don't know if that's like some part where the math just knows that we need more yielding regardless of the percent, or if it's just an actual coincidence. But something I is near and dear to my heart, because we have so many S minuses with strong preferences, that we think we're getting them in a good spot preference wise, and it's all for naught at that point. But this looks promising. Yeah, maybe second here. Maybe first. Maybe first. Wow, there you go. Two furlongs left. We see we've got some healthy farmers in here. And then shout out to GVG. He's going to pull home second here by the looks of it. Who's the stable that got the sombrero, 3rd, 4th, and 5th in a 5-horse race? Let's check that out. Elon Gates Musk Stables. We appreciate your Derby contribution to our stable. We get the same amount of crown you did per horse, so we love that. We saw a lot of that in earlier seasons for sure. We've seen a lot less of it since, but I'm appreciative every time I see it. Let me get caught up on chat before we dive any further, though. Yeah, Sowers missed the layup, it seems. This has been waiting weeks for this one, and then Grandpa's Do It Better did do it better. He's been waiting all year. If you had stents for more PFL Discord messages than Sowers in the year 2024, you can already cash that one in. I thought I was above board in some comments today. There were some, I will say, heat is maybe not the perfect term, but there was some spirited debate on breeding mechanics, I'll call it, and we can certainly touch on that as well, time permitting, and maybe that'll be one of the earlier things we talk about. What's up, Brad? Poker player, even the snowman. Yes, snowman. In Minnesota, we've had like 1 inch of snow all year. It's been ridiculous. Today is like the first day. It actually feels like it could be January, and even then, it's like it's 25 and it's dark out. Like a normal year, this would be like 5 degrees at this point, maybe even lower. So certainly love that. Let's see what else we got here. Shout out to Wolof Farms, Bandito Dow. Big sale today. Proof that the top end of the market is alive and well. And I think a point I'll try to drive home based on some things that I've been reading and make sure that my perspective on it is known, is that I think the middle and the bottom of the market is fine as well. I think what we're seeing is people are more in tune with what might make a good horse, what might not be a good horse. And that's healthy if you have some price discovery at those levels. Even sometimes before they're raced once. I spent a lot of time looking through the progeny of each filly we have. We've got up to 10 foals at this point from each one. Are they consistently producing regardless of which sire you're using? Are there sires that are passing down earlier peaks consistently? Those are the things that I've tried to keep tabs on as best I can. And I don't have any concrete evidence of things, but some anecdotal takeaways which help me inform what horses we make available. But yeah, if we go back to our racing stable and look at kind of the horses for the season, we saw the results, which were potentially lacking. Yeah, racing 43, as you'll see, most of them are registered and most are juveniles. So if we do youngest age of 3, and then we go back to racing because that filter doesn't stay, we've only got a whopping 6 horses that aren't juveniles, and of those, only one of those horses is older than 3 years old. So that's certainly not by accident. We've certainly tried to make sure that our racing population is reasonable, even if our actual global horse population is anything but reasonable. Um, so when we get to talking about benchmarks later, we'll definitely lean on Mr. B a little bit because we're certainly not necessarily running them. You'll see there's obviously no fillies here. I think we'll start seeing fillies run as three-year olds, maybe as soon as this coming retirement decision window. Obviously, we'll get into which ones we may consider for that, but benchmarks are certainly a hot topic. But this crowd, in large part, has been racing in claimers for the most part. I don't know if I don't see benchmarks or if they're not part of the suggested races for us, because like Ape did this horse, which was the first breed between Apollo and Ape, which I think in its third attempt made an S plus, but this one was a decent racer early in its career, but it's really sort of become a donkey since. So I think it's a horse that I'm paying attention to as potentially an aging thing. It hasn't won since 12, 15. That would be 2 seasons ago, right? The last season ended on 12, 18. So hasn't won in its 5-year-old season and has raced plenty and sometimes hasn't raced very aggressively either. Than 100K claimer for an S with pretty good preferences. Someone will have to remind me to get back to the time of day some of these claimers are running, I think, is factoring into what we're seeing as claimed or not claimed. This was at 10:42 my time in the morning, so a little curious we're not seeing some claims there, but claiming is all about eyeballs and participation as well, and I think those are some things that are certainly lacking. As far as the rest of the horses above 2-year-olds, Pickens, we got infamously from Zook. It qualified for the left turf major last year. It should have run the left turf sprint. It might have been competitive there. But for the lulz, I wanted to see if I could get him to hit the board in the major after picking it up in a claimer early last season. Crazy Daisy and Violet Skies are both stayers or marathon horses at left dirt. So I'm excited for next week's Kentucky Derby lead up. I don't think they'll necessarily be competitive, but you're seeing his 3-year-old running decent kind of composite fleet figures all at distance. So I think they'll definitely either be able to do well in the qualifying series or do well in graded stakes outside of the qualifying series. If we switch back to we'll do oldest age of, we'll filter those out. Oldest age of 2. Population gets a bit bigger. Well, 172 horses, 2 or under. But in this case, we only care about racing. So yeah, I mentioned we use S minuses across the board to the detriment of our racing prospects. You can see 1 win and only 3 times hitting the board total out of 12. This would be Billy Goat, so that would be Goat, which was amongst the best RTF Gen 0 racers with Mercury, who was a good S minus, but I think we're definitely seeing cases where the law of averages works out, and if you take a top S with a top S minus, you end up with kind of middling S, and if people are using S's, top S's and top S's together in the graded stakes races, certainly this horse would have had to hit a wick or 2 to be super competitive. We've got the, I think, somewhat well known in this case, and we'll pull this one up, Not For Sale. This is still true despite a not great race record. We'll review these 2 together, and then She Bloody Slipped our kind of LTS S's that we're excited about, even if they don't have crazy good race records. She Bloody Slipped, actually, that's not bad. So what we like about Not For Sale, like I said, we bred with an S minus, but it's an S from an S minus and an A plus. So again, law of averages would tell you that would make it a middling S minus. It came out an S, so obviously it outkicked its coverage somewhere. It's got 8 preferences, so to my knowledge, I'm pretty sure this is true. It'll be the only S LTS in the stud barn that doesn't have any 1 of 1s in it. Um, I think that's true. I know there's some S minus fillies, and I don't know if they use Blood Moon, but I think it's Blood Moon's only. The only options would be this or Moonchild, I think. So then Dairyman, but I think this is from a 1-of-1. Let's check. Yeah. And then again, if Bryce is in the audience, the second we can get filters on the Progeny tab, that would be super useful. 100-Year War, I know that's from 100 Acres, I think, is another S filly. So yeah, we got some fillies, and one is ours here that may not have 1-of-1 in them, but from a colt standpoint, it's the only one that exists from Blood Moon. And then the other horse I said we should check on that statement is Moonchild. So let's pull that up. That's also Eddie's. Always free advertising for Eddie on this, and we do actually love Eddie. Moonchild. Does this horse have any S's? It's got one S that's a filly. So yeah, I think that statement's correct, that'll be the only one to hit the barn. That's an S from 0 1-of-1s. And at LTS, that is kind of of particular importance because there just wasn't that many S minus fillies to begin with. There wasn't that many S minus colts to begin with. So there are some absolute monsters at LTS, Morpheus being one that's prominently featured in the breeding barn. I know Soulmate's just unpacked 2 S pluses. Eddie's probably got a couple, but if we're playing the long game of eventually someone's going to have to not use a 1-of-1 or take a step down, hopefully this presents an opportunity to not be too big of a step down. We'll probably use this one ourselves this season, I think. It's also likely that we actually do what we're supposed to do and use the private breeding option to do that, as opposed to the kind of flash breeding, which we shouldn't be able to do, which this will be the third stream I've suggested we shouldn't be able to do that. If you don't know what flash breeding is, that just means I either set an alarm or let the dog wake me up at some obscure time, change the stud fee on whatever we had listed to the minimum, and then use our voluminous quantity of fillies to fill the total 35 allowable covers ourselves. And the only way someone else would be able to hit that is if they happen to be on at the same time and saw it, or we're using a bot, and the bot is against terms of service. So it's pretty safe right now. Maybe a cooldown timer would work because while it's safe, it's certainly not necessarily healthy. We should not be able to do that. I said She Bloody Slipped. I actually like this horse quite a bit. It's also a Ruby offspring, although from one of I think that must be the first full of Ruby we used with Pluto. So then you have an S minus and an S minus. Still making S. Still only 1-of-1 used. So we're really excited about this horse. We'll probably take this to Saturn this time, or maybe we actually swing like what we haven't done. And if you've listened to my reveal streams on Fool's Day, I think the refrain this last time is if I wanted to breed an S plus, I should probably use S plus colts. We still have not bred with a single S plus colt. Like I said, this entire crop was more or less bred with S minus colts. So we kind of get what we pay for in that sense. So maybe this is something that I don't think I can use Morpheus, but I'm wondering if there's ways for us to take some swings here. We won't review all these horses in this detail. Certainly no one cares that much. But there are 3 more at the S level, and then we'll see if there's anything that's crazy good underneath. Our biggest disappointments in the season to date, other than are in the, I guess, live to date from a breeding outcome standpoint, and that's saying a lot because our 2 pride and joys of the right turf firm archetype have disappointed every window. But we took Ape, which is narrowly, I think, Commission's got like rarity 128 or 129, so only like 4 rarity worse. So the rarest of the Astro LDF pieces to One-Eyed Blind, which is a non-1-of-1 at LDS, certainly rare combination there. The purpose of doing this was to try to bring One-Eyed Blind to firm, which we, I guess, narrowly accomplished here. And I think in my experience, of switching archetypes, even if it's only one of the archetypes. So switching dirt to firm, or sorry, firm to soft, or dirt to turf, or left to right. Even changing one seriously jeopardizes the quality of, or the expected quality of the horse you have. Changing more than one is, I think, disastrous from a racing outcome. It doesn't mean it's disastrous from a breeding outcome. But seeing as how it wasn't a huge firm preference, and we stayed firm, and what I liked about this is I thought that One-Eyed Blind might bring over a really solid S finish, and certainly bring over that S plus stamina. And if people know LDF well, most of the LDF stuff already loved to sprint. And then obviously Eddie from Pocono Racing's got Lucy Juice and Lucy Wood and all the Lucy's in the world that are all like SS minus start, SS minus speed. Like, we're just doing the opposite. We'll try to get towards the longer range of the spectrums, and to bring in the longer range of the spectrums, other than using scuba kind of as a by default. Certainly you can wick it somewhere, but by default you had to bring over LDS into LDF, and we've done that a lot, but we're paying for it in racing results. Certainly with these two assets, you'd think you'd come across probably a more competitive horse. The good news is it does prefer to run longer distances. 11 furlongs was its best fleet figure twice. It did the same fleet figure on good as it did on soft. 72 is not a bad fleet figure, but it's not a good one either, in my opinion. For a 2-year-old, maybe it's fine. And then kind of the same thing here. Like I said, Swift Sapphire, this is Big Brain Stables, or I think actually NFT Brad is the owner of this horse. They just recently sold must have been an S plus from this today to Good Guy GVG. It's nice to see some big sales going off there. So yeah, you take Scuba, which does always have that S plus stamina in large part, and have S plus stamina here. And I think One-Eyed Blind has a strong finish rating as well. I thought we would make a pretty good longer distance or stayer horse here. And again, same thing. Its best fleet figures are longer distances. We ran it at 4 furlongs just to make sure we were right in that. Got a 55 there. So in large part, I think we accomplished the distance preferences that we were after. So the hope is that these become a lot better with the next generation. So this can't use Apollo, because obviously Swift Sapphire is a Scuba as well. It can't use Pounder Fields, but it could use Yukon, which we own, which is Astro. It could use Dozer, which is Astro. That's put out some good horses. And then vice versa on the other one. Ape could use Apollo, but it couldn't use Dozer or Yukon. So the other option we could breed these with is similar to Not For Sale. We even tried to tip our hands in the naming of this one with the tongue twister of Unique New York. And this is unique in the sense that it also has no one-of-ones. It has good preferences. I can't claim this to be the only one. I'm sure Shawnee Bear has made S's from non-one-of-ones before. I know Persian Bold hadn't been used a lot, but for like the Matches Mafia out there, you've got a lot of combined matches across these horses, with Shawnee Bear probably having 3, Daisy having a couple there for sure, and Persian Bold obviously having a couple as well. So I don't know, is this, Kamish can write in the chat, is this like a 15 match horse? I don't know how we evaluate those. And it actually has hit the board at a somewhat reasonable rate, just not in the front of the board. And then as a part of that, I love this edition. I don't even know when this happened. The Expand Missed Podiums, because yes, it tells you win, place, show, and missed podiums. That's no different than what this tells you there, right? You don't need a graphical representation of that. But if you expand it, so I think Expand Missed Podiums should be the default. You can see that it's got third a lot. But it's remained competitive, and I think it's running large fields too. So it's not getting last. It did get 10th once. Maybe that was last there. It doesn't maybe have as strong as a distance preference, although we got Yeah, maybe it doesn't have a distance preference at all. We got a 71 at 11 furlongs, which we like if we're trying to go long distance as a stable, and then 70 at 4 furlongs, although yielding probably paid a big part of that. So just ultimately not a great racer. Our decision on how often we use this to breed will be when we run breeding reports on it. How close to an average S does it actually look like? Certainly, we'll see that with the stat grade reveal. But ultimately, what I'm going to do in my evaluation of this horse is I'm going to run breeding reports with my fillies with Shawnee Bear, and then I'm going to run them with Unique New York and kind of layer those, compare and contrast. Is Unique New York better than Shawnee Bear? Certainly, I would think it would be as an S, and then do the same thing with Persian Bold. And then I'll probably use some of the S's as comparisons as well. So whether that's Apollo or Yukon or Dozer, just to see how much I'm sacrificing in kind of underlying stats to have better preferences for sure. And I like that it's got 3 stars firm. Obviously, it's not going to stay 3 stars firm. But if a horse only has 2-star dirt or 2-star left, you can rehabilitate those pretty easy because most horses' strongest preferences are left or right. And then the second strongest most times is dirt or turf. It's always hard to get and keep firm or soft. So once you got it, I certainly like to use it. So if we don't use this at the high end with like One-Eyed Ape or what they say, Swift Eyes, the other horse, if we don't use it with those two, we'll probably use it underneath. So maybe a lot of the Gen Zero lower graded stuff that we have. And like I said, this one isn't super unique because Shawnee Bear was used a ton. So even if it is one of the few S's that are out there, if it's used Shawnee Bear before, it can't use this. So for lower graded stuff, like I said, we'll go through this a little quickly. Got a couple. We saw Bloody Alice there get another win. I think we have some highly variant horses. Bloody Grace is 3 wins and 9 starts, but hasn't hit the board since. And that might not stand out to you, but I think if we looked at the results, we'd see if we do the Expandimus podiums, I think this is a horse that just like literally gets first or last. And you're seeing Fleet Figures. Well, I guess those are 4 furlongs. Let's see what we got here. Maybe I could be just running this one around from time to time. Definitely good longer distance, but it's lost longer distances. Oh, that's not as bad as I thought. Looked like a Finney back in the old other game racing days, if anybody's familiar with the win place show structure of Genesis Finneys. Diana Disappoints. So you'll notice we did Bold in a lot of names, Bloody in a lot of names, Mercury in a lot of names. We're getting lazy in our naming convention. If there are people that want to pay to name our horses, which is kind of a joke and kind of not, I would totally allow that at that point, because we're running out of names to try to keep with including the filly's name in it, so it's easy to track. When I name a horse Diana Disappoints, I know the mare was Diana. If I named one in Bold Lucy, I know the mare's Lucy, and that helps me track all of the Lucy horses together. Hope is the name of the horse here. Grace is the name of the horse there. Ivy's the name of the horse there. When we do that, we can see that Hope is a pretty good horse. Ivy's a pretty good horse. They're pretty consistently putting out good horses. Sometimes you get surprised. So this is Mercury Hayes. And I didn't include, or unless this is Hazel, maybe this is Hazel. Maybe that would make sense. I didn't even know that. That makes sense. That horse should be good. Never mind. That's what happens when you have too many horses to actually actively track. See if we got anything else on there. That's about it. So pretty mediocre racing records across the board. I think we named this one Poster Child because it's a goat offspring, and that was the poster child for my disappointing breeding results at RTF. Yeah. This shouldn't be an S- in my opinion. It's got a somewhat okay racing record, although not a lot of win equity, but certainly it's been a little bit disappointing. In our strategy of what we sell versus what we keep, obviously we're getting to have quite a few racing horses. when we turn over a new season, initially we were selling some of each, some fillies, but we didn't want to sell a lot of fillies because we wanted to be able to grow our population. So if we were trying to raise funds for breeding or racing or what have you, we would sell some colts. Once there became like a huge delineation between values on colts and fillies, where you could almost see like an upward trajectory on colts values, like they were worth almost anything when they were 0-year-olds because they were 3 months away from racing or 2 months away from racing. But once you could race them, they were pretty valuable because at the time, at least you go back a couple seasons, a good S- colt could run in 150K, 175K, maybe even 250K claimers. We're seeing some downward pressure on claimers, which we'll talk about. But with that upward trajectory on values of colts, that's led us, and this is the first crop of that, where we didn't sell any colts before they were of age to race. And the way we're selling colts is to have them claimed in claimers. And we're really seeing kind of, I think, just less attention paid to claimers. And we'll talk a little bit about claimers when we get Mr. B to join. But to talk about them now, I think people are very in tune with or very active in reviewing what happens on the marketplace. They look for new listings. They might have some saved filtered criteria for horses they're looking for. And they might review that a lot. Claimers requires a higher attention to detail. You have to, and I shout out to MJ if he's in the chat. He's got crazy tools for this. It'll at least tell you when I accidentally drop another filly in claimers, which has happened twice now, way underneath the value of those fillies at the time. And Lady Wasabi got one, so all is well with the world. But it does require an attention, and I wonder if that's an opportunity for the team to, when we went to this 24-hour racing calendar, one unintended consequence of that is it scattered all the claimers out, and in this case, it made claimers run at 3 a.m. Eastern or 4 a.m. Eastern, and the pick window or the window for you to claim a horse from that race is then, if it's at 4 a.m., I think your pick window is open at 2 a.m. to 3:50 a.m. or something along those lines. I think you get 2 hours leading up to the race, more or less. I don't think there's that many people stateside that are willing to be up from 2 to 3:50 a.m. just to see if someone made a mistake entering a horse in claimers. And certainly we have some Euro presence and we have some Aussie presence, but I think in large part our presence is stateside. So I think you're seeing a lot of races that just don't even have the option to necessarily get horses claimed very effectively because the claiming window is non-peak hours. So I think a potential solution for this, and you would want to also cater towards the Euros or the Aussies and find a window for them. But if you could find a time where the Americans are awake and the Euros are awake, so sometime, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern or 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern, which is in the evening in Europe, if my math is somewhat correct, where everybody's paying attention, but also do them in a somewhat concentrated fashion of, instead of, every fifth race is a claimer or whatever the cadence is, have those claiming window hours. I would certainly stream around claimers. You're not going to get me to call races, but you can get me to talk about what I think is interesting about a horse. And I think that's something that Doughboy would stream around, MJ would stream around. So I think targeted windows for content, I know we have that with the After Dark races, but those aren't always all claimer races, is a way to get more eyeballs on claimers. Now, if claimers are throughout the day, certainly you have the opportunity to have more eyeballs on the site for a longer period of time. I just don't think we're seeing that actually come to fruition, or I think more horses would be getting claimed. Because even if what right now is the matter with claimers is maybe a lack of demand of horses that are known quantities, there's certainly demand for unraced fillies because you don't know the upside for those. There's certainly demand at the high end of the market. We saw a couple million Derby sales, 1.25 to GVG, 2.5 to big brain. So the market is fine in a lot of spots. Even since then, we had an 850,000 sale. I didn't even see this one. But claiming activity as a whole, I think, is really dropped off. And when Mr. B and I want to tell you, I'll basically preface what Mr. B will say is like, claiming is the only racing format that can't be gamed, because if a horse is too good to be racing in that claiming race, it'll get claimed. That is true so long as there's sufficient demand to claim horses and sufficient attention paid to claimers. We're not seeing sufficient demand or attention, or a combination of both. So you are getting really good S's racing in 100K claimers, or really good S minuses racing in 50 to 75K claimers. And I'm not talking about the horses that are 5 or 6 years old, like what was once a really good S minus racing in 50K claimers as a 5-year-old is probably fine, because the remaining racing value, the remaining utility of that horse, assuming it's not going to breed anything, might actually be 50,000. So then you have the question of, well, do you need a mature horses class of racing for for claimers? And I know that was a discussion point today. I guess my stance on that would be no, because the values do solve for that as well. If we're saying the remaining useful life of that horse is 50K, a function of that is, one, it can't race that many more times, but two, we have peak age in the game that at some point, for most horses, that horse should be past its peak and therefore not as good of a racer as it once was. I think that's perfectly healthy in that case. So I don't think you necessarily need to over-engineer claimers, but I do think we have to get to a point where we're drawing more eyeballs and more attention to claimers. And I don't say that from, in my opinion, a standpoint of bias. Like, certainly we have colts that we're racing that, like I said before this, our mechanism to sell those horses is to have them claimed in claimers. We showed you we only have 6 horses that are racing that are 3-year-old or older. We have only 1 that's older than 3. So we are moving colts and claimers. We will drop colts and claimers more and more aggressively as they age, or even within a particular season. If we started the 2-year-old juvenile season here, and I wanted to see what my horse was first, because preferences aren't the be-all end-all for an S minus, and we have S minuses that would beat all of our S's, and we have A pluses that would beat 75% of our S minuses. So your first kind of 3 races are discovery of distance preference and maybe the caliber of the horse. Maybe you have to race 6 times to know distance preference and the caliber of the horse. And that gets you to past the first week of the season starting. And then you can start in claimers, and maybe you start at 150K and then you go down to 100. I'm dropping my horse in claimers, even in the 2-year-old season, knowing that it has less appeal to anybody else. The longer I'm owning it, the longer I'm racing it than anybody else. I must have got the bat signal appropriately tuned in, because we have Mr. B. What's up, Mr.
Hey.
B?
How you doing?
Did I touch a nerve, or you just happen to be joining at the time anyways?
I just happened to join. I haven't been. I don't watch your streams.
I know. I'm acutely aware of this, but we do have a lot of people watching and some comments in chat. So I'll try to just get caught up in chat, and then we can dive into kind of the schedule at large and the 3 formats of races that are maybe contributing to that. Let's see what we got here. I apologize, guys. I'm way behind in
that's no
chat.
problem.
Well, I don't need to waste your time and their time. So we'll do listener questions type stuff. If I missed a question now, just certainly ask it later. I'll happily take those on. But Mr. B, I just outlined for everybody, I think the issue with claimers isn't that valuations of horses are falling off a cliff. It isn't that, in some cases, that we don't even have enough users with respect to claimers. The issue might be an attention thing and how they're scattered throughout the early morning hours, stateside oftentimes, and they're all throughout the day, every time. If there was a targeted window of 2 hours where it was more or less claimers only in the morning and 2 hours in the evening where you could capture both United States and euros, do you think that that would lead to more claiming activity, or do you think there's something much more worse afoot?
I think it's a bigger problem than that, though I do think that would be a good idea. I know it had been discussed, and I think initially when they started doing them, they did have them kind of in a 1 hour window. And I do think it makes it easier for people to follow them that way. Now with the 22-hour schedule, I don't know how easy it is to do that, but certainly they could make it more of an event. I think people aren't paying attention to them right now, partly prices are down and people just are like, yeah, I don't really want any more horses. Though I do think the way they have done the stimmies has created a big problem with the claimers, where it's pushed the better horses down. Now, I don't think it's solely responsible for what's going on. I mean, things got a little crazy last season with the way stimmies were, and claimers in particular, because they were the higher entry fees. So people, and with the auto generation of races, right? So you have auto generation of races, higher fees, and guaranteed profit no matter where you finish in a race. So if I had a B- horse, why am I going to run him in a race when I could just put him in a 200K claimer, let it fill up, I just keep on doing it, and I make $30. So that was a no-brainer, particularly at the end of season 9 when people kind of figured it out and were like, okay, well, I don't really care if I finish in last. I'll just fill this race up and we'll go to the next one and we'll go to the next one. And that was actually good for the good horses, because they would actually win. Not only would they make the money, they would win the race. So it was beneficial for the better horses, and it was free money for the crappy horses. I think the team kind of maybe overreacted to that and said, okay, look, people are farming these races. Well, once they adjusted the stimmies for this season, there was no reason people were going to farm those races. People aren't going to put a B- in a 200K claimer so they can lose $30. They were doing it so they could make money. And yet, partly because of that, and partly because I think they wanted to make sure the stimmies would cover the whole schedule, they kind of capped the stimmies on the high dollar races, which basically made the people with horses that would be running in 200K claimers might still run in that. But why am I going to want to run against some killer if I might finish 4th or 5th, in which case I'm going to lose money on that race? I'm better off moving down where the stimmies were there. So I don't know where the cutoff point is. Is it 100 or 100 and a quarter, where so people are just going to move down? That's just common sense. People are going to race where the incentives are to race. And if the team is going to make it basically incentivize you to race an 125K claimer, that's where people are going to race. We went through this, and this is sounds more like a monologue now, but we went through this earlier when we had 100K max claimers, right? And then people with the best horses, whether it's like a mediocre S or a really good S-, had nowhere to race, right? So they would basically have to race in a 100K claimer or they wouldn't race. So if I had a horse, Into the Fire, actually turned out to be a pretty decent horse, but at the time he was a little bit of a slow developer. Maybe it took me a little while to find his distance preference, but I didn't know where to race him. If I'd raced him in open company, he would get beaten, like a drum. He was a good horse, but not good enough to beat the top S horses. And I didn't want to lose him for 100K and race him in the 100K claimers. So I didn't race him, or I would race him very sparingly. I had another good horse, Dark Cloud Rising, which was an S- horse, who was better than 100K claimers, but either I'd have to wait, every 3 or 4 days to find the right S- race to race him in, or just take my shot in 100K claimer. So I ran him a 100K claimer, he got claimed. The S horse, Into the Fire, I didn't bother running in that. Now, the next season, they raised the claiming prices. Now, all of a sudden, these horses had a place to run. So the S horse and the S minus horse both would be able to run above the 100K claimers. So that was actually a good adjustment that they made, allowing a place for horse to race. You kind of have the opposite situation now, where the only good place to race is in the 125K claimers and lower. If you have, once again, you could wait if you have an S minus that's at the top of his class, and you can just race him in the S minus only, or the S minus S plus races, especially when they're getting 4 pounds from the S, the 459 races, or 954, I don't know which one it is. Or you're going to run them in 125K claimers. You run them in 200 and 250K claimers. One, you might run into an S horse in there now. Two, those races generally aren't filling, or if they do fill, the irony is they're actually filling sometimes now with people farming those races because no one is running in it. So people are actually I entered one today, I think, and I got lucky in that I didn't know it, but there were 4 crappy horses in it plus mine. Easy W, because they were farming that race, not thinking anyone was going to run in it. So, and then I entered, I think, like a 75K claimer just a while ago, and it was all S minus horses. Every horse in the race is an S minus. So you actually have the opposite now, where for the most part, crappier horses are running in the big races, and they're looking to farm only based on the 4-horse farm, where basically no one else is going to run in that race. Right. And then the horses that are looking for a positive ROI are moving down. I know you're doing that very, somewhat aggressively. Ghost is doing that but you're just basically following the incentives. So long story, I think the market had to adjust to begin with. Okay, things got a little overheated. People in crypto in particular are just like, oh, we're making money now, we're going to make money like this forever. Okay, not considering that the stimmies were going to change. Ian announced the stimmies were going to change. So part of that is a little bit of just short-sightedness. Plus, you and I had thought, okay, as the population grows, prices are going to go down. We've thought that for months, and we've been wrong, right? So
I don't know if we were wrong, but the market just did what it was going to do.
Yeah. So part of it is just that. But I think the way the schedule was set up just kind of made things worse and maybe exacerbated a problem that was going to happen anyway. You don't really want to force people to move down, because that now I have an A+ horse. What do I race them? I have to race them in 50 claimers, 45 claimers, because I could wait for the once every 5 days for an A+ only race. I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but we talked about the allowances. You have these A-, A+ allowances, and the A+ for the most part is getting the worst of it in those races. So those aren't necessarily good spots for the A+ horse. You can run, if you have a really good one, you can run in an A+ restricted race and you can win there, or you run in the claimers. But now the claimers they were running in, so basically everything is pushed down because of the way they kind of changed the stimmies to the point where you're getting less stimmy per dollar entered in the higher claimers. And it's not just the higher claimers. Obviously, they were doing it in the big dollar races too. They fixed it somewhat, but they still really haven't fixed it. I mean, who's going to want to run against, Miss Jackson or one of Eddie's horses in an LT race just so they can get slaughtered and lose $200? What's the point of that? I mean, you did it maybe, I think, the first day or two of the season. You might have put a couple of horses and then after that, you're just like, okay, I had my fun, but I'm not gonna do that. Anyway, long rant. I don't even know what the question was.
No, you're good. And I think it's funny because you took it back to where we started with the 100K claimers, and I felt like you kind of beat around the point I thought you were going to make with it. Is we're basically effectively back to having 100K claimers be like the top end of the claiming range. Like, there are other options that exist, but they're not really that good of options, because if you have a horse that can run, I'll say above 150K, I think you're seeing competitive races through 150K, and then above that, it's either like an actual monster horse in there, but only one, and then 3 donkeys or some farming going on. But otherwise, you should race elsewhere. And I think the top end of that is fine, and that's healthy. You have that Monster S there where it should potentially be. So I think that's what the team's intent was. It's like, these should be reserved for the best horses there. They don't necessarily need incentives if they're going to win the race there. But what they missed was the trickle-down impact of it's going to push everything down. And then if you don't have requisite demand for these horses, there's no punishment for me, for you, for Ghost, for Soulmates, anybody with a large stable to raise a horse for that we made cheaply. And we can talk about what's too cheap to make a horse and all sorts of mechanics potential changes. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a demand thing. It's a visibility thing that people aren't seeing or aren't paying attention to these claimers, that people would claim these horses if they were paying attention. But yeah, to your point, we're going to follow the incentives. And I think like the perfect spot to race a horse, I don't know if the cutoff is 90 or 100K claimers where the incentives start to dip off. But yeah, I think those are amongst the most competitive races on the entire platform right now, even more so than G1s and G2s. You mentioned allowances. I will give credit to the team, kudos to the team on the non-winners of 1, non-winners of 2, non-winners of 3, and how those build throughout the schedule. So the first week is non-winners of 1. Well, you and I both know that means maiden realistically, yet it's listed as an allowance. And then the next week it's non-winners of 2, and then the week after that it's non-winners of 3. To my knowledge, they don't have non-winners of 4. So next week gets a little bit tricky for everybody that was relying on those places to have a place to run a horse that didn't need to get beat up on by S minuses running in 50K claimers. They could actually run this allowance spectrum. So I guess what I would suggest to the team is, and use reasonable weights. We'll talk about unreasonable weights at some point too, but use reasonable weights. But there's no reason in my mind that you can't have split each week in half and say for the first half of the first week you have non-winners of 1, and for the second half of the second week you have non-winners of 1 and non-winners of 2, and then for the following week you have the first half of that week you have non-winners of 2 and non-winners of 3, and then so on and so forth, so that you have at the end of the season you have a non-winners of at least 5 or non-winners of 6. So the horses that can't compete in grade restricted races, which are coming, going, staying, nobody knows, but can't compete there, because the top end of those are just as tough as racing against the top S pluses. They just are. If they can't race there, they can't race in claimers because the incentives are pushing all the horses down in claimers. At least they have this allowance continuum that they can race in and have a chance. And then when we talk about unreasonable weights, I think everybody in the community is mostly, if not absolutely, in agreement that it really makes no sense that any subgrade would have a 4-pound advantage over another subgrade. 3, I don't love, but I can live with it. But then we have this structure where it starts from the A- and goes to the S- level. Like, those probably should just go away completely. At this point, we have so few A- horses, and I'm not making a stance on we should have more, we should have less A- horses. I'm using the fact of the population of horses that we have suggests we have way less A- horses than we do S-. I think than we do A+ horses, but yet the only place to effectively run an A+ is claimers if it's a colt, or A+ restricted stakes, which to your point, that we have both A- and A+ restricted stakes. The frequency of both of those might be the exact same, but the A- have the allowance spectrum that they're the most preferred grade. They have handicaps, which they're probably amongst the most preferred grade for. And the A+ has the A+ restricted stakes.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, this is, look, I've been hoping that these allowance, particularly the 3 and 4 grade ones, would go away, but
That's pretty good.
Yeah, thank you, Poker. I think the problem, this goes way back, even with 2 pounds. I think the way the initial breeding was set up, right, of the horses, is it was easier to get more matches there's a bunch of 5-match in B minus and B and B plus. And as you go up, it was very, very hard to get. So the more matches made the more preferences, right? So all things being equal, it's much easier to have, let's say, a 9 preference A minus horse than it is to have a 9 preference A plus horse. In fact, like if you pick like RTS, there basically don't exist 9 preference, A plus RTS horse. Maybe there's a couple now. Initially there were none. Right. So what happens is, all things being equal, even at 2 pounds, you're going to have more horses at A minus that have 9 preferences than at A plus. So even if 2 pounds was the perfect separation between grades, between an A minus and an A and an A plus and an S minus, all things being equal, you're going to have a deeper pool of A minus horses than you are going to have of A horses, and you're going to hire A plus horses. So even then, by its very nature, they favor the lower grade. And then when you give them more pounds, it just kind of makes it crazy. So I would do away with them altogether. But if you're going to have them, they should actually favor the higher grades, and they shouldn't give more pounds to the lower grades, especially as the population is changing. There's more and more horses at the top. So you're actually making an A minus horse a better, more valuable racer than an A plus horse. And that to me is just crazy. I'm not saying to get rid of the A minus. I'm not saying they shouldn't be allowed. If you want to have them for smaller stakes. But I just don't understand the logic in terms of making an A minus horse a more valuable racing horse than an A plus horse, and giving more opportunities to race them. Now, I have horses pretty much, at this point, I don't have too many A minus horses, but I have had horses of all grades. I still, I'm not like, let's say YSM or Eddie's stable, where you just have monsters and you don't really race the lower grades. Well, YSM doesn't even race at all. But,
that's where I thought you were going with that.
But Eddie does. Eddie loves to race. I mean, at one point, Eddie claimed one of my Gen Zero horses, it was an A horse, an RDF A horse, and he was running them in 30 claimers, and he got more fun out of that, or just as much fun as he does, winning a grade 1. So, but that being said, he does tend to focus at the upper end of the market. So I've seen it all, and I just don't understand it. But ultimately, they've said they were going to do away with it. I hope they do, which could lead us to the benchmark situation, which people were in exec chat today talking about the benchmarks, and I kind of gave up. I had other things to do. I'm not anti-benchmark as much as, one, they're not easy to put together correctly, and 2, I think even if they are put together correctly, they're just a better version of a handicap. If you had it, so right now you have a handicap that favors the lower grades, and you have A minus horse racing with, A plus and S minus horses, and the purses, the entry fees are fairly on the high side. So that's a big value to the A minus horse, because now they can run for a higher purse than they would run otherwise. And a properly done benchmark would have kind of A plus horses, or horses that run the same figure, run against, the band of horses running in those races will be much tighter if it's done properly, right? So you want horses, let's say, that run, right now they might have a 51 to 60 or 66 to 75. Some of them are 5 fleet figure points, but a handicap might have horses with, let's say, a 20 to 25 band of fleet figures. So a properly designed benchmark would have, let's say, 3 to 5 fleet figure variants, amongst the grouping. So it would be better that horses will run, against competitive horses, and you don't have to worry about getting the weight, or at least you shouldn't. The problem is, I think it takes a lot of the strategy away, because now you're just, okay, I'm going to enter a horse in this race. Pretty much everything's the same horse, and I don't really see the skill involved in that. Or they set it up a certain way and it's gameable, right? So the JJ has its horse that
Oh,
basically can't lose right now because they're not changing the benchmarks, and his horse is basically running where he's, 5 lengths better than any horse possible that would run in that race. Now, I'm sure they'll fix that kind of stuff, but there'll be new ways to game this. I'm not saying the JJ gamed it. He just kind of lucked into it.
He backed into it, but there's like so many obvious issues with it. And I, like you, am not necessarily anti-benchmark. I am scarred for life from the other game where the entire racing ecosystem, basically, for sure in the entire life cycle, I was there. But I think even long after that, is essentially lobbies of benchmark races. The whole thing was structured on benchmarks, and they couldn't quite figure out how to effectively manage it. And we can say this team's better than that team. Some things they are better at, some things they might not always be better at. But the issue with benchmarks, is not even understanding what the effective criteria to have them is. So if we take where you kind of left off there, is your benchmark rating doesn't adjust as you run benchmarks, yet we have peak age associated with these horses. So even if he didn't luck box his way into it, the JJ's benchmark is created from his horse being a 2-year-old. Well, what if the horse peaks or starts peaking, didn't even start peaking until 3, nowhere up on its spectrum, and it's just actually getting better? Well, that's not taking into account the horse improving with age. So I do think you'd have to have the benchmark rating have some sort of impact based on its performances in benchmark races itself. And then as best we could tell, we actually looked at this for about an hour leading up to the stream. As best we can tell, you don't have to run in your archetype to have to qualify for benchmark counting it. So if you had, let's say you had a horse that was a 4 to 6 furlong left dirt firm horse. If you were racing that in left dirt or left turf firm sprints, because that's a viable strategy, maybe you run a lower fleet figure, but maybe you're competitive because there just aren't that many left turf firm sprinters to begin with. So you're competitive, but you have a lower fleet figure. Well, we actually found examples where left turf firm isn't counted against this left dirt firm horse. So it's lowering its fleet figure, even if it's actually probably racing pretty effectively, which lowers the benchmark rating it has. And then the next step, I think, is probably even worse in that it doesn't seem to make you have to consider the distance funnel that the benchmark would be a part of. So right now, and I hope they change it before we get here, but right now, everybody would be highly incentivized to take their last 3 races of the 2-year-old season. And if you have a horse that prefers 4 furlongs at left dirt firm, you should run 3 12 furlong right turf soft races, because as best we could tell, it doesn't even make you run on the archetype in the distance funnel, and it just takes the last 3 races and averages those out. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I hope they fix it before it comes to that. But if you want to intelligently design benchmarks, which can be done, but it takes maintenance, you have to factor in some results within the benchmark races themselves. And you have to take a population that is representative of the benchmark race they're going to run in. So if it's a 5 furlong left dirt firm benchmark, look at left dirt between 4 furlongs and 8 furlongs maybe. And if it's a longer race, do the opposite. But look at running on preference. Firm soft, I don't know that I care too much about that, because the person entered the race not knowing they were going to get soft. I mean, I guess you could take a left dirt firm horse and race it in 100% to arbitrarily lower your fleet figure. But it is certainly, if we thought claiming races at the end of season 9 were broken, and I do, and I don't love that you could make 16 instances of the same single race, I think this is the poorest race design we currently and have ever had. So if they're going to be a part of the long-term structure, they need a lot of work on how you even qualify for a benchmark race, making them show up in recommended races if they don't already, and recommend the ones you should probably be running in. And then I think there's an argument to be made that right now, one criteria we think they have is that if you ran in a race with weights in it, so I see Riptide's in the chat saying he hasn't paid as much attention to these. if you're paying attention, one thing is that it does exclude races where you carried weights. But what's funny about that is I personally of the belief, and I know several others are as well, that the fleet figure your horse runs in a race is independent on how much or if your horse carried any weight in that race. So to exclude the ones where they were carrying weight is also kind of another comedy of errors step in that progression. But I think if they got these right, it also probably means in the benchmark races themselves, you don't assign weight to horses, because I think we see enough temper rolls on a race. We see enough weather variance. We see horses that prefer 4 furlongs more than they prefer 6, and maybe this benchmark race is 6. If you're within like 3 to 4 fleet figures, those horses are in their own cohort if they qualified for the race on merits, not gamed their way into racing in that race. So I don't think you even need to apply weight to them. I think age needs to be considered at some point as well if you're not going to consider benchmark performance.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got here. That was a spicy one, so we got some stuff in here. Peep's talking in the chat like he even races at all. Funny enough, Peep, we have a horse name ad nauseum. It's an A. It's the only A we bred this window. It's not that bad. Left turf, soft horse. Yeah, and Sowers makes a good point, or at least maybe makes me take like a half step back in that. I'm not saying game design is easy, but I think understanding what criteria should have been considered would have been easier than they proved it to be. I think implementing it would have been hard, but I think they should have thought of most of the things we just talked about.
I'll say this. I'm not that worked up about benchmarks right now. They're basically, you farm them when there's only a couple of horses in the race, or you look at the range, and if it's 51 to 60 or 51 to 59 and I have a 51, then I'm going to enter a horse there, because I'm probably, and especially if it's the right distance preference and and right archetype. But it could be gamed if I wanted to put the time and energy into gaming it. I realize it's a first step on their part, so I'm not particularly worked up that there are issues with it right now. I just think by and large, they're inferior to claimers in almost every respect. So that's my biggest issue is, one, they take a tremendous amount of fine tuning and maintenance, like you just pointed out, to get them working properly. And there's ultimate ways that people are going to try to figure out how to game them. And they're going to have to constantly play this cat and mouse game. We're going to figure out a way to game them. They're going to have to adjust. Okay. There's no way to game a claimer. That's the beauty of it. You're putting your horse up for sale. If you're putting a good horse in a race, someone can claim it. Period. You can only game it in the situation where they were giving out money to enter the race and you had the Oracle generating races. Well, yeah, if Crown Moon's like that, you know what the solution is? Change the Crown Stimmies in the middle of the season, okay, like they did this season. So you're not giving free money away. You're better off saving it. I would have just taken the money for that season and moved it over to this season when Crown basically doubled during the season. But that's a separate issue. It's not really that wasn't really a claimer issue. That was a fluky thing where Crown just went way up in price, and they set the Crown allocations at the beginning of the season. Crown Moon, and then all of a sudden, poker players on a roll here. Crown Moon, and that made the claiming problem an issue, because those were the highest entry fees. That way you get the most crown for your buck, and they were auto-generating. That's not really an issue with claimers. That had more of an issue with the Oracle than anything else. And it was an unusual situation where Crown had moved to the point where you could make money finishing in last. You just had to enter a horse. So why would you enter a horse for 1,000 Derby when you can enter one for 10,000, right? You're not going to make as much money there. You'd make more money coming in last in a 200K claimer than you'd probably come in winning a different race. So that was the issue. And that's not, like I said, it's not a claimer issue. That's an issue of just a function of the Oracle and a function of crown price. Claimers, they're not gameable. Now, yes, there are issues with fillies. There are issues with horses you don't want to lose. And that's where you should have options for people that don't want to lose horses and claimers. Well, that's a good question. I don't know that. In fact, Poker Player, he should be on the show. He should be on the stream. The issue is exactly that. The entry fees for the claimers are higher than the entry fees for like grade restricted. They were up till this season higher than some of the grade restricted stakes races. So they shouldn't be. What I would do is have high price claimers have the entry fees lowered and have the stimmies still there, not getting a lower stimmy return than you would in a lower claim. Okay, every race should basically have the same proportion of the purse in stimmies. And the way to fix the claimer issue, I would do was lower the fees for the claimers and raise the fees for the stakes races. That would actually solve some of the stimmy problem, because if you have all these high priced claimers and the stimmies are high in there, they have to balance it out, and they only have so much stimmies they can give out. So here's the thing. I'm usually pretty critical of the schedule. I'm not saying it's an easy job, especially managing the stimmy portion of it. That's kind of beyond my pay grade. I'm not good at figuring out how to, okay, we've got this much money we can allocate, these much stimmies we can allocate. How do we figure out the schedule for that? So when I criticize stuff, I don't really factor that in. And that's probably a mistake on my part, because that is part of the equation. But I do think that longer term, I've always been like, claimers are it. And when we go through this, claimers are just easier. It's less work on their end to design an appropriate claimer entry fees and having it's not just simple saying, okay, here's a claimer, because you have to, if you claim a horse for 100, right, and you think he's better, you have to have a place to race him above that claiming price, or you have the cap of 100, and that's what we were talking about earlier. So you do need to have options on okay, this, and you have to figure out in the schedule how often you're going to run these various claimers. So it's not a simple thing, but I think it's much easier than trying to design a whole set of benchmarks. I would take benchmarks to replace these handicaps and maybe replace a lot of the allowance races as they are now. But I don't think a big part of the schedule is focusing on benchmarks. I think it's just a waste of their time. And I think it's just creating this cat and mouse game where people are going to try to figure out how to game it. And someone should explain to me. And the thing is, I know it's the Euros, and maybe it's the Aussies as well that love the benchmarks. And I'd actually like to hear. I'd love to hear them explain why it's better and how it would work in PFL. I would love to hear.
You just got to go in the Discord, sir. Just go into the Discord. They'll tell you all day long.
Yeah,
like literally all day long. The same person, they'll take an 8-hour shift and type in block paragraphs. They'll tell you. You just got to ask, sir.
I just don't get how. I think he was saying I was based, or maybe he was calling me an ass. Like, I'm not really sure.
It was based. It
could go either way. It's probably both.
It's probably a little bit of both. No, yeah. So here, I'll cut the team some slack on the higher entry fee claimers. We basically explicitly asked for them to do that. We said at an earlier point in time, several seasons ago, these horses were too valuable because they were 1 out of 4,000 in a horse population, or even 1 out of 6,000 in a horse population. And each horse incrementally mattered more then than it did now. And for us to race those horses, we had to have something to race for to risk losing them for the claim amount. That ratio could be more dynamic now. Hell, it could actually, like, as each season progresses, you could have the entry fee as a function of the claim amount go down slightly, like, because the population's growing. That seems something you could manage. That seems like it makes sense. So where 10,000 made sense and 250,000 as a claim amount made sense, it doesn't necessarily anymore. It's funny, we talk about the ebbs and flows of the life cycle of claimers, where we started at 100K max, then we got a 250, we finally got to 275. Basically, at the time, we probably didn't even need 275 anymore. Like now, if the top claimers were 200K, 175K, that's probably what the marketplace would suggest is the reasonable price for these horses. But from an entry fee standpoint, I would say I would welcome the team taking another look at the entry fee, but also in that, take a look at the claiming ratio associated with all races, but especially those as well, because they shouldn't be penalized for racing up. And that's effectively what they've done for the claimers above, I think it's above 100K. Yeah, we still need to find a way to get fillies and claimers. I know Ghost sometimes tends to be quite a bit more negative than even I am. And obviously, if you think I'm negative, then why do I have 299 horses with 103 pregnant mares? We certainly had opportunities to sell some horses. So while I take a tone...
You're a masochist, maybe? Is that
what? Maybe. So I might take a tone or a stance, but obviously certainly bullish and want this to work as much as anybody does. So yeah, I think there's a way to get fillies and claimers fairly easily. I do agree with you that claimers cannot be gamed, but we have to do something to try to showcase the opportunity to claim horses, because I think that's kind of fallen by the wayside right now. People are getting their horses from the marketplace. They're not necessarily getting their horses from claimers. I mean, if I would be curious if the Gap data guys or someone had like an easy chart to show like climbing activity by week, like it just has to more or less fallen off a cliff.
Yeah, like I said, I think it has a function to do with just the way the market is right now. So when the market's soft like that, I mean, honestly, sometimes I don't even want to look because I don't want to get tempted to claim a horse. I have too many horses as things are, and I'm just like, all right, I know Stens is putting this horse. I really should claim that. What's that? The one you got from Zook?
Oh, Pickens. Yeah, it's raced in
Pickens.
125K twice, and it wins most times. But yeah, no one
saw that, and I was like, all right, I don't. And then I was like, is it a 3-year-old? I'm like, oh my God, it's a 3-year-old. And I was just like, no, I can't do it. Speaking of based and me being an asshole, I told this story in the Discord, but it was pretty funny in real life. So sometimes I get a little worked up, and I know when they put the schedule out and I saw the 4, 5, 9 allowance races, I just kind of went off. I'm like, how fucking stupid is this? And Ian was like, do you talk to your family like that? Is that the way you talk to your family? That's not like appropriate. And I didn't say anything at that point. Fast forward, I'm on vacation with my family, my once every 5-year vacation.
Yeah, of course.
And we're sitting down to dinner, and I don't even remember what the specifics, but my wife kind of said something, and it wasn't, I was being very snippy, and I was kind of being an asshole, and she was like, you don't talk to your horse racing friends like that. And I was like, actually, I do. So I'm an asshole, not just in the Discord, but I'm an asshole in real life as well. So,
yeah, well, consistency.
I own up to that.
We like consistency, so.
Yes, but I did apologize in Discord, and I did apologize to my wife that time, though probably not often enough. So I think I get animated about things, and people come across like I'm yelling at them, and it's more I'm like, it happened in Discord again about the 4, 5, 9, and it just sticks in my craw. And the thing is, I can take advantage of that. It doesn't actually disadvantage me. It disadvantages people that don't pay attention. And it's basically an S- restricted race that maybe you'll get people that aren't paying attention that an S or an S plus is basically never enter those races. You might get an S enter it. And it just, the thing that kind of bothered me the most about that is it was bad enough when it was, 3 pounds. Okay. to actually look at the schedule and go, oh, you know what? Let me make it 4 pounds. It was just like, what are you doing? 3 pounds is already overpowering for the lower grade. Like, what would possess someone to make it 4 pounds? And I get it. It doesn't mean anything in the scheme of things. And there's no reason why I should get so upset about it. But stuff like that kind of just sets me off, because I'm just like, it, in my mind, it shows a lack of understanding of like how things work. And that's probably not true. There's probably doing 55 other things and it doesn't make a difference. And maybe they're setting it up for something down the road. I don't know. All I know is I see that and I'm just like, what the fuck are you doing? And it just sets me off. Anyway, that's it. But it doesn't really matter that much. It's not a big thing. I realize it has no bearing on the ultimate success of the game. It just sets me off.
Yeah. And I guess I'll probably wrap here soon. So if you guys got questions, get them in the chat. But I guess my overarching commentary on the game, where the team's at, where the game's going, what the team could provide is, I think we see it. And obviously there are probably a dozen non-PFL official, but PFL related discords. D-Stables has one for sure that we're in. Gap Data has one for sure. There are no shortage of places that people are talking PFL, and your viewpoint and your understanding of what should happen or what's wrong with this or what could be improved is shaped in large part by the people you share those spaces with. And I'm not in the PFL Discord for some obvious reasons there all that often at all. And so I don't know if I see everything in the Discord there, but what I will say is I see a lot of commentary about prices are coming down, new users aren't showing up. And I think the new user thing is probably actually maybe provable. That might actually be a statistic, but that doesn't mean the team doesn't already have something near the finish line or could be announced soon. Their last fundraise would have been, in my estimation, a down round where it had some live racing data to go off of, but certainly before crown price went up, which made all of these metrics go absolutely bonkers. And since then have had the opportunity to raise on those bonkers numbers. And now we're correcting a little bit, but in the grand scheme of the last 6 months, we're probably back to where we were in September, October, from like a racing environment and a health of the ecosystem, which wasn't a bad place. It's just not where we were at middle of November, middle of December. So I think we're in a healthy spot. And if we don't have new users, that doesn't mean horse demand, our horse prices are doomed. And even if you see me sell an S minus for what was it, like 29,999 the other day, that horse was a donkey. Like, just because it's an S minus, people need to get the global grade out of their heads as it being like an indicator of quality and frankly preferences for that in that part as well. I think what we're seeing is maturing ecosystem of users where they're understanding if mares are consistently putting out good horses, they should maybe target those to buy. If mares are consistently putting out donkeys, maybe they shouldn't buy those. If a horse races 10 times and hasn't hit the board once, even if it has good preferences, maybe it's not that great of a horse. Doesn't mean it can't be a good breeding piece. We're just seeing people be more selective in things. And as everything is kind of congregated at the S minus level because you destroy the game early and often with all of your stud fees, everybody got to S minus very quickly. I'm here to say, like, I think we have, of the, 43 racers this season, like 35 of them are S minuses. And like I said earlier in the stream, we probably have 3 S minuses that would beat every single one of our S's that are racing. And we have probably 2 A pluses that would beat 75% of those 35 S minuses. So the global grade doesn't even mean very much, but even within the S minus spectrum, there are S minuses that I think people wouldn't sell for millions, probably too high, but 600,000 Derby even if it was unraced, but for sure if it's raced and it had success and it was still early in its 2-year-old season, and there are S minuses that just aren't worth that much. And you know what hits the marketplace? The horses that aren't worth that much, the ones that people didn't want. And if they didn't want them, chances are other people didn't want them. If no new users or not as many new users as we'd like are showing up, that means everybody else probably already has a reasonable number of horses that they're comfortable with. Adding a horse for someone, you outlined it with Pickens. Yes, that horse is worth more than 125K. No, you don't need it. What's the downside risk of claiming Pickens? Probably not that much. Like someone else probably claims it a week later if you drop it down to 100K or what have you. But we're at a satiation point with most of the user base if they have what they want. And we're seeing a maturing crowd of they can identify that for sure for raced horses, like this horse just isn't very good, regardless of if it's an S- with good preferences. And I think we're seeing it in the unraced market as well. And then we're seeing people correctly, I think, in my estimation, value like time to maturity. Like a 0-year-old filly always should have been worth less than a 1-year-old filly. And less than a day 1 2-year-old filly, and we're finally getting to the point where kind of those ratios I think make more sense. And colts are still appreciating in value from when they're a 0-year-old to a 1-year-old to a day 1 2-year-old, but their ceiling is effectively more or less capped based on where they can race. And like we said, if the claiming threshold is kind of stopped at the 100K level, outside special circumstances the race above in a claiming setting, if it can't race S- restricted or can't race grade restricted races in general, then we're kind of capping the upside on some of those horses. It doesn't mean we can't correct all of these things we talked about as potential flaws, whether that was my harsh criticism of benchmarks or you talking about the ratio on claimers or how to incentivize people to race up. I think all of these things are correctable and will correct themselves if the price of Crown goes up, if more users show up. I think the price of Crown goes up and new users show up if the team makes partnerships and announcements. And if they have that 4-month window of time of just fucking glorious numbers, I'll be frankly fairly surprised and obviously very disappointed if they don't have some material announcement or 2 or 3 to show for it. So I'm not as doom and gloom as it seems like I hear from a lot of other people. I think our best months are likely to be ahead of us, but to your point and to the point we've made throughout is if you are one of 4,000 horses, that is more unique than being one of 18,000 horses. So even if it was an S at that 1 out of 4,000 or an S-, and now you have an S+, it's still at the end of the day, it's one of 100 S+s now. It's not the first S+. It won't be the last S+. So values are going to correct when things aren't unique in a growing population.
Yeah. And to your point about, I'm not down on the game at all. I mean, things ebb and flow. You know, season 9, I think most of us were like this in the short run, that was definitely going to be a peak. It was just crazy, right? The way Crown mooned, you couldn't lose money racing. It was impossible to lose money. I mean, every race was positive EV no matter where you finished. So it was just enter as many races as you can. And, you know, you pick your spot. So yeah, things got a little out of hand, but that doesn't mean it's the peak forever. It just means in the short run, that was it. You know, I've been a believer in this team from the beginning. I like to, you know, bitch and moan a lot. I question certain things, but that's just, races are still insanely plus EV. Yes, they are for the most part, not necessarily the high price claimers, but even those are, I guess, all things being equal, they are if you have the right horses to run in them.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm not saying that it's the end of the world. It's still a very good situation. You just need to be a little more discriminating this season. You have to kind of go back. I mean, we were racing when Crown was 3 to 5 cents. So, you know, this is a hell of a lot better situation than that. I mean, I was racing a year and a half ago for free, right? We were racing in the beta. I was challenging, going head to head with Wolof to see who would have like the most fake earnings of, for just a sense of pride. So I like doing the racing. I love this. I still watch like almost every race that my horses are in. I might fast forward a little bit to kind of get to the good part, but I watch them all. I love, racing horses. I love the strategy of actually picking the right race for the horse. So I'm like a huge fan of this thing. I'm not like, so most of my criticisms are just because I want it to be even better. Not because I'm like, this sucks or whatever. And yeah, I probably would be better suited to kind of say, more positive things, and this is great, but I'm more, I'm better suited to finding like the mistakes and harping on that rather than like, this is great. And once again, my wife would probably be one to definitely affirm what I'm saying on this regard. So, that's a personal flaw of mine, and, whatever, this isn't a therapy session, but the point being, I really am a huge fan of PFL. And even if I harp on things that bother me, that doesn't really change how much I like the game. And you're an even better example of that. Like, you can't have, a bigger kind of meltdown if you want than you had, and you're fucking still here. So that just shows how much we really like the game and how enjoyable it is, and how much the strategy and everything else of picking races and breeding and all aspects of the game, it's very consuming, and, I love it. And yeah, I like to bitch about it, but I love it. And, that's all I have to say. That'll be my final thing. I love PFL.
All right. I appreciate you joining. I'm going to wrap soon myself here, but I appreciate you joining. I'll take whatever questions we got, and then I'll probably wrap myself here in like 10 to 15 minutes. But and feel free to drop whenever, Mr. B, if you'd like. Sekas in chat, and shout out to Sekas. He was engaging in exec chat and wanted to convey some thoughts. I know not everybody's going to agree, and when you raise comments in an exec chat that has kind of an effective buy-in of, call it $40,000 USDC, that's gonna shape some people's opinions in there. So I appreciate you still voicing it nonetheless. But how much of an impact did the short-term crowdfunding opportunity have on our user acquisition data in Q4, do you think? That's a good question. If I'm understanding it correctly, is did we not network ourselves as individual stables? Did we not onboard as many people as we potentially could have, because it was so lucrative that there was no incentive to sell horses? You could certainly hoard horses. Do you have any thought on that, Mr. B? I don't mean to keep calling you back into the conversation if you're trying to drop.
I'm actually
a really good question.
The question is he saying that we weren't helping, or is he saying that it was so lucrative that it actually had more people join because of the kind of frenzy that was going on? So I actually think it actually helped user acquisition. And I feel bad maybe for some of those people that might have come in during that kind of frenzy. And, now the market's kind of corrected, during this current season. So I'm not sure exactly, but I would take the question to kind of mean that it actually helped in the short run bring people in, because there was just no way to lose money, right? So if you think of crypto and it's like, oh, look at this, look how I can make money, I'm going to get in, I'm going to buy a horse, I'm going to do it, not realizing that, okay, the stimmies are going to go down the next season, the population's going to go up. And honestly, I'm past the point where I'm going to predict where prices are going to go, because I would always tell people, well, it's going to go down and then it would go up. And I'd sell my horses and I'd be like, look what I sold this to 360 win for. And then a month later, I'm like, oh, who's the idiot, right? So, who knows? I don't really try to predict that stuff, but I think it actually did help user acquisition in Q4, not hurt it.
I think it certainly had to bring more people in net, and I think it created genuine hype, so that the third way his question could potentially be asked, and I'll eventually scroll to see if he reframed the question, is did it spoil us could be the other way to phrase that question. Of we had it so good, now it's the first season that crown stimmies are down and ratios are adjusted for a larger population, which means more horses in general. Were we spoiled, and is that impacting sentiment more than it should? I definitely think it's impacting sentiment more than it should, but we can hop into the next one here. Riptide, shout out to Grape Syndicate. Nearly touched on it earlier. Are internal public breeds too cheap in your opinions? Yes, 100%. Flash breeding should be gone. It should have been gone before we were able to actually effectively do it. Like, I think the easiest solution, and I've been saying this for like 6 months now, is if the minimum breed is $50, make the minimum breed for everything be $50. Don't let internal breeds be 20% of $50, because what that would do is that would make it no better or worse for Mr. B to price Serenity now at 20,000 Derby, because he's still going to pay $50. He's going to pay 20% of 20,000, or if the math is right, I think it is. Which means if he prices Serenity now at 20,000, because he doesn't get the benefit of it being any cheaper, then do you open up the opportunity that a Baraghost or an S- colt could kind of actually have a place at 10,000 or 15,000 Derby. Now, if they're going to breed with Baraghost and they own it, they still have to pay the $50. But if there's no incentive to price your colt below 20,000, then I think there becomes a place for more horses to be involved in the breeding process. It was very candid conversation about, is Lucy Juice soaking up 35 covers good for the game or bad for the game? Obviously, it's good for the game because it puts so much money back into the ecosystem. Should there be a place for more colts in the breeding system? I think a way to do that is to make the minimum breed $50 regardless, which I said would make people price their horses externally. There would be no more advantage to price them externally less than 20,000. Now, obviously, they could price it at 5,000 if they want to, or 4,000 if they want to, just because they want to make sure they're still getting the covers they were getting. Fine. That's fine too, because they're still paying $50 for the internal breed, which actually means there's 5 times more income going back into the Derby juice. So sorry for ruining your ruining of the game, Mr. B, but I'm pretty strong and forceful on that. And like I said, I'm the biggest abuser of flash breeding, and I shouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, I don't even for the ones I do internally, I don't think I've ever done more than 10 or 15. So most of the Serenity Now breeds are not going to my stable. It's just a gift to the community as a whole. I guess I haven't really put a lot of thought into it. I don't have a problem with them making changes. I do think something like this kind of needs to be announced almost ahead of time, and it shouldn't just be like the day before season 11. It should really be starting in season 12 or starting in this is the change we're going to do, so that if someone bought a sire just so they could do a whole bunch of internal breeds and then have the rug pulled on them because they changed the rules when this has been the rule for how many seasons, I guess I would say I think things could be done on that. I have to really think of the best way to do it. But I do think, once again, it's the same thing with them changing like the purses 3 days into the season. It's like, give notice, let people discuss it. And I think there are reasonable ways that they could fix the breeding so that you're not just breeding everything internally for $10. And that actually feeds on itself as well, because now you do flash breeds, and now it makes it much easier for you to put a horse in a low price claimer because it costs you $10 to make it. So yes, I do think that that's something that should be addressed. I'm not sure the perfect way to do it, but I don't think that's a bad idea.
Yeah. Flying Henchman asked, have we discussed entry fees to race? Lowering entry fees with a growing horse population may increase volume. I'll take this one because this might be one of those ones where you may talk about how you talk to your horse racing people and how you talk about your wife, maybe use an expletive or not. I think horse entry fees or race entry fees need to be reevaluated across the board. The top end of the claimers don't necessarily need to be 10K entry fee anymore. that made sense when horse population was smaller. I think we need to evolve as the horse population evolves. I think the team would even agree with that general statement that they need to be evolving on all things. It was brought up in the chat earlier today too that handicaps on occasion have higher entry fees than grade 3 races. In what world does that make any sense at all? So I think if you do like a bottom to top look at entry fees with the North Star of grade 1s through grades 3 always have higher entry fees than any other race type. And if the lowest is a maiden claiming, which we don't even have yet, even though there's a filter for it, I think that'd be a good race type to have. If the lowest possible is a maiden claiming race, then you have all of the room in between those entry fees to build in your grade restricted, to build in your benchmarks, to build in your claiming structure. And where claiming was very popular because it was very lucrative for good reason and for bad reason at times, maybe claiming races ultimately do fit in where they would in real life, where they're just above a maiden claiming race. They're actually below allowances. Now, you still have to provide incentive to race there. If a person is risking their horse for 125K to only win 4,000 Derby, they're not going to do that with a good horse. So there still needs to be somewhat of an elevated entry fee than what you would maybe see in real life. But I think, yeah, across the board entry fees should be looked at. Going back to the question, because the horse population is increasing, should they go lower because of that? I don't think they should go lower because of that. I think there should just be a wider band of racing options, which includes lower entry fees on some race types. But I think the team understood their polling data results without understanding the context of their polling data. When they raised entry fees across the board, there is a place for higher entry fees. Grade 1s through grade 2, grade 3 should be higher entry fees than even what we have now. It just doesn't need to be every single race being 2x the entry fee with no more crown going to anything. Like, of course, that was going to kind of have an austerity impact on the market. So I would welcome them looking at entry fees as a whole and using that North Star of grade 1 and through grade 3 are the highest entry fees. Maiden claimant is the lowest. Everything else has to fit in between, but be in between based on the in real life marketability of that race type.
Right. And you're going to see this with the Gen 1s are now 6, right? So you're going to have lower price claimers, and they started putting them on the schedule, I think, this week. And I think that's a good thing. Because you have to have places for horses to race, right? And what are you going to do with an 8-year-old horse? Right? That if their ability is down and their useful life as a racer is going to end in a few weeks, well, you have to have a place to race them. So I do think that will be there. Hours? No, that's the answer.
Should high stakes
have the same Crown to Derby ratio? If you mean the Crown to Derby ratio, then the answer is yes. If it's
yeah, I think I would read that as ratio.
Yes,
we're way behind on chat, but I think he means ratio.
Then yes, I think they do. It's the same issue. If you don't want to incentivize people to have a higher ROI by racing down, okay? So it's not going to matter for the best horses; they're going to run anyway. But if you have a marginal horse who's probably not going to beat Miss Jackson, okay, why are you going to take a shot there if you're getting less stimmy? You're better off racing down. Whereas if the stimmies are there, I think Soulmate says is if you're going to finish, if he thinks this horse might finish, fourth or fifth best, and sometimes he'll finish there, then he'll run it. But if the stimmies are lower, you're not going to take on you're not going to take them on. So what happens is no one's going to run in those races when you have a clear dominant horse. So I'm a strong believer that they should not have less stimmies. But
why do you keep singling out Miss Jackson? I feel like you should apologize to Miss Jackson. I want to hear you say sorry, Miss Jackson. On the stream.
Sorry, Miss Jackson. It's nothing against.
Can
that
you
horse.
sing it? Can you?
Horse.
No. Can you sing it? Can you have some inflection in your voice when you say sorry, Miss Jackson?
No, I'm not going to do that. That's a disabled horse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I
It's
own 1.4% of, because I keep buying. If you want to blame someone for being a top signal, it was me buying 1% of the
yeah.
stables. But
I think I have 3 of those coins now. But
I
everything I would say is you don't want to discourage people from racing up. You don't want to incentivize people to race below the level that they should be racing at or are willing to race at. And I think that goes for claimers, it goes for stakes races, it goes for pretty much every archetype or every particular type of race. You don't want to incentivize people to race down.
Yeah. Sekas did clarify his question. He was saying, did those people just come and go? I don't know if they were smart enough to come and go, and I don't mean that to be rude, but it would you have to have a fundamental understanding of the racing ecosystem and the trajectory of stimmies with a growing horse population to realize it was going to have that big of change between season 9 to season 10. So I don't think if they came, I don't think they're gone because of that. Now you could make a question or a concern of, did they come in high tides and now we've changed things, and could that lead to a poor user experience? In fact, that's a valid question. I think that Mr. B kind of alluded to that exact same thing.
Yeah, I think that people that but that happens in kind of, that's just the nature of crypto, right? People just kind of FOMO into something, and especially when it's positive EV, you probably did have people that came in, but that's an unfortunate thing. There are other people that came in. I remember over the summer, what was it, TKG? He was like a coin guy, right? He was a crypto coin. He came in, loved the game, right? And just decided to stay, and actually has a real nice stable now. So the key is kind of, yes, getting the people that come in, finding the game addictive or challenging and kind of liking the community, and getting them to stay in the game. And I do think you had a lot of people that just kind of came in, rushed in. The game might not be for them. So not only did they come in at a particularly bad time in terms of, coming in for the pricing, but they really weren't in it. They were in it just to farm and make money. And, those people are going to get washed out. So that's just the nature of what goes on. The key is that we kind of make it rewarding for people to come in. And I do think, and once again, I like to criticize, but I do think the one thing that Ian has not the one thing, but one thing that Ian has done really well is we do have a very passionate community, and we fight all the time, but we're all passionate about the game. And that, a lot of that does come from Ian's stewardship and knowing that he's equally as passionate about stuff. Love him or hate him, he's always in the fucking Discord, always either trolling us and coming up with middle of the night stuff. I mean, he's in there, and that actually does trickle down to the rest of the community where, we're all in it, and it does help people that come into the community stay in the community. So
I've got this comment from Sours up as a placeholder, because it reminded me of, and maybe it wasn't originally Ghost, but I've heard it from Ghost, of having more Crown actually go to this higher tier of racing, including grade ones, including to some extent high entry fee claimers, and then having the Derby stimulus, instead of be at the top, have that supplement where Crown is at the bottom of the racing schedule, so that horses that are winning at the B level, that are winning at the B plus, A minus, A, are benefiting more than they would benefit now, because if they win now, they get the same crown as everybody else in the race. But now if they won, if you move the Derby stimulus to the lower stakes races, then winning those is so much more meaningful. And the horses that aren't winning those races aren't too much to the worst of the wear, I don't think. I'm not trying to start a fight with Sekas or anybody else, or T Green if he's in the audience. But I think there's some merit to rewarding winning on the lower end with Derby, where Derby stimulus would actually make a meaningful impact. The issue with Derby stimulus on the top end, outside of the majors and the major sprints, is Derby at the top end is not informing anybody's racing decision. They were either racing that lobby based on the weather, the distance, the archetype, or they were not racing that lobby. The Derby is a bonus, and it's a nice bonus, but it's not changing the decision. So if you allocated more crown to the higher entry fee races or the higher stakes as far as like race type, grade 1 through grade 3, could you not get fuller fields for the Miss Jacksons of the world or the Gianna or whatever that right turf one that is a monster right now from Shockwave? Commish will tell you how much you need that horse and that bloodline.
It's the most profitable sire in the history of PFL, by the way.
Yeah. So if you have those dominant horses that win 60% of the time, 70% of the time, Thug Passion's another example of that from seasons gone by. Then do you at least get the S's like my weak S's that aren't great? If there's crown there, I guess personally, and again, it's hard to remove your bias from this question, but I think I'm more willing to take a chance there. Now, you could make an argument that the B is more willing to take a chance there too, but I don't think they would. As long as you're not 100% supplementing the entry fee by crown, as long as they're losing something if they don't hit the board, I think you could find a sweet spot in that I'm fine losing whatever percent of my entry fee so long as I feel like I could hit the board. And you mentioned that was the Soulmates commentary of if he thinks he can get 4th or 5th, he'll maybe take a chance. I think if you actually restore crown ratios, then maybe that expands from not just 4th or 5th, but if you have a chance at 3rd, even if your most likely outcome is 6th or 7th, I think you get more people taking chances there. And if you have more people taking chances there, if you get 8 horse fields instead of 5 horse fields, then Miss Jackson, anything named Lucy makes more money per race they run, which makes the top horses more valuable, which makes the horses that slot under those top horses more valuable. Now, to your point earlier, we evaluate in a lot of cases the race schedule in a vacuum, and there's only so much crown to go around. So what we're asking for would mean crown from somewhere else, and maybe it means more crown than just the bottom tier races that I was talking about swapping crown for Derby for, because if they're lower tier, they don't get that much crown to begin with. I think another avenue where you could save, and I do want your thoughts on this after this, I'll shut up after this. I think another case where they could save a lot of crown, at least early in the season, we don't see it as much after the first week, but early in the season, if a V1 represents 100% of the crown offerings of a given race, or sorry, a non-V1, like a V0 of a race, the original race lobby represents 100% of the crown allocation. A V1 should represent 75% or 50% of the crown of what that V0, the original race, is getting, because in theory they're getting a weaker field. If the horse was good enough to enter when the first lobby was created, they're confident in that horse's ability. We saw throughout the entire life cycle of the game that the V1s, the V2s, the V3s, and if you get to them, the V4s are about as soft as they come, and therefore I think it's appropriate to award less crown, which means you have more crown elsewhere. Now, again, that's maybe a 1 week thing, 2 week thing max. I think I see like 1 or 2 V1s or V2s a day in my racing schedule. But what are your thoughts on changing where Derby shows up as a reward and maybe moving crown towards the top?
I do think for the V1s and they're, gradually reducing it is a good thing. I don't think it's that big of a deal unless we're in a situation like last season, and then it would probably be absolutely necessary. Right now, I don't know how much it's going to save. I kind of either zoned out or just missed the point about the B racers. So how are you getting more? What are we talking about? Specific stakes for like B horses or B plus horses? Or I was kind of missing that.
So I said Derby does not change your decision making at the top end. Now, certainly you love the Derby. That's in the Derbies themselves, the majors themselves, the major sprints where it's all funded by Derby. But the difference between a G1 and a G2 and whether or not it's got Derby added to it is not changing your decision making process.
Oh, you're talking about the Derby stimmies on the races?
Correct. And having the Derby go to race lobbies that would typically be allowances, handicaps, grade restricted races below or A plus and below, like those types of things. where if you structure the Derby Stimmy there the way that you do Derby Stimmy at the top end, which Derby Stimmy at the top end, horses that get first through fourth are getting the Derby Stimmy. Horse that gets 12th isn't getting. No, maybe if you do move this, you still do it where the last place horse gets some Derby. You just have a sliding scale from 1 to 12. It's not 1 to 4. But could you pivot and say, we don't need to put Derby at the top end. We need to put Crown at the top end. And in lieu of that change, you put the Derby at the bottom end, such that a horse that wins its race, whether that's a handicap or wins an A- grade restricted race, they're at least getting an outsized benefit. Like there is an actual reward for having the best A- horse in the game. There's an actual reward for having the best A horse in the game, where now, yeah, you want to hit the board, but you're getting Crown, and winning that race isn't that much more impactful than getting second in that race. Then you could actually have some, I think, value in having the top A horse. Right now, people treat A as an A as an A.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't put much thought into it, but yeah, that seems perfectly reasonable, and I do agree at the top end, I'm not really looking at that. So yeah, I tend to look more at the Crown Stimmy and the size of the field than any kind of Derby benefit there.
Okay, so 4 minutes to your bedtime. I want you to answer this one, and you need to drop, or you're going to get roped into staying with me for another half hour. Okay, Flying Henchman with the best question of the night so far, and I'm behind in chat. I mentioned partnerships earlier. What type of partnerships do you think third-time PFL would make the biggest impact? I'll let you go first. I think there's one obvious answer, but I'm curious if you have anything else.
Well, I mean, I think they probably have the right one right now. And then the question is, longer term, it's going to be gambling, okay, and something that can facilitate that. So I don't know whether it's DraftKings, FanDuel, or whether it's continuing their partnership with it's with Churchill Downs, but they have Twin Spires, right? So that would be a logical progression, and that would be. But I don't think they're ready for that right now. But that would be the ideal one. And then following, I think Ian even brought this up when they got the Kentucky Derby one, is you start doing major races or major tracks around the world, right? So That's also a no-brainer. And that would make perfect sense. So all right, you have the Derby, now we have the Arc, now we have, the Melbourne Cup, whatever. There's all sorts of things that they could partner with, and that would be, just logical extensions, and then you could start dealing with sponsorships. But it kind of starts, I think, with partners, and you want partners that are horse racing, related, and gambling, obviously, because we think gambling would be the big unlock to make this increase the user base, and it actually solves a lot of the problems with the stimmies going away, because you have people wagering on it. Wagering is going to be a not zero sum, it's going to be a negative sum game, and if that flows through to the people racing the horses, then the game explodes, and it makes it so much more lucrative to own horses, race horses. It increases, it's just, the flywheel will be going in, humming when and if that happens. So, that's my thinking on that, but I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, if we scroll quickly to the wrong answers only section, we've got Sowers here with Pornhub as most influential. It might be the most influential, yeah.
Who did he have? Remember we had that person when they did the Mint that time for the MVP?
Yeah, for MVP, she got her own. That was an actual.
The Sweets. It was the Sweets at that point. They did have
she was either a playmate or some sort of adult entertainer. Yeah, Sowers nails it. I think I get Twin Spires. They might have the network for, but I think the crowd you're after is the DFS crowd. And if the real two problems are gambling and user acquisition, either DraftKings or FanDuel solves both of those at the same time. So like that's going to have the most outsized impact. I think you could make a case that from a visibility or an eye standpoint, that even like something like Twitch itself, although I know they apparently don't love gambling, so maybe Kick or Dare to Dream, like ESPN3 were just like not on ESPN or ESPN2, but like on the web version or the app version of ESPN. Like there's a channel where there's
The Ocho.
ESPN the Ocho, where they're streaming 2 hours a day, and they got Monos and Doughboy, whoever, P talking, where you kind of syndicate the content creation that we have. And obviously, if you did that, by then there would be better people than me, so I certainly wouldn't need to make the list. I think those are the true unlocks there. But I'll let you drop. I will answer questions, but you need to drop or you're going to get stuck with me forever.
All right. Take care.
See you, Mr. B. Thanks. Okay, let's see what we got here. I'll at least commit to no more than 15 more minutes, but we'll try to get through most of these as quick as we can. Buy the dips. Yeah. I at least mentioned that in the exec chat today. If people feel like they don't have a place in the game at the low end of the spectrum, every crown is worth the same amount as every other crown, and therefore you have the same opportunities with crown that anybody else has. Not financial advice, do your own research, but crown's just a perfectly good way. If you don't feel like you can own a horse but you want to participate in the ecosystem, like that's the way. And I mean, it's easy from you don't have to be better than Mr. B, you don't have to be better than Soulsmate or Soulmates on racing. You have the same opportunities as anybody else. Yeah, going back to the solutions we talked about, moving where crown fits. Yeah, crown is going to fluctuate, and we've seen where when crown fluctuates to the high end, you have like rampant behavior that would correct if crown drops. So if crown goes to $5, I know Peep said it earlier, any problems go away with that. I get it. I just think there's got to be a way to encourage more people to donate to Eddie's horses, to donate to D-Stable's horses. And by donate, I mean have those horses win, but have everybody else entering thinking they have a chance to actually come out, even if it's $1 ahead. Because if I can't come $1 ahead racing against D-Stable's horses or Eddie's horses, that means I drop my horse down, which means the people that could otherwise win there have to drop down, which means the people that could otherwise win there have to drop down, which means the people that could otherwise win there have to drop down. And you get to that same kind of downclassing we saw in the other game. Brad says, why not make first get the most crowns, second a bit less, and so on and so forth. I think you should do that with Derby. The problem with is crown is kind of your safe haven. That's like your employer's 3% match, or just a true safe harbor contribution where they put in 3% of your earnings or 6% of your earnings, regardless if you contribute at all. Like that's how crown's working. That's getting large fields. That's exactly, it's doing what it's supposed to do. That's what I'm saying is if there was a higher crown award across the board to higher entry fee races or grade 1 races, grade 2 races, grade 3 races, you're going to have more participants in those races. So I don't know that tiering the crown makes sense. I think tiering Derby incentives would make sense. And if you, like I said, when I was making an example, if you want to take the Derby incentives from 1st through 4th and go 1st through 12th instead, like then maybe the burden is eased on crown a little bit. Now the Derby incentives seem to pale in comparison to the crown incentives at the current price we're at. The price is a different price and Derby incentives go up, like that ratio can change. So I don't envy the team in trying to balance crown gifts versus where the Derby stimulus goes. I think in that case, they've actually tended to do a pretty good job. I just think it was a misstep on, they thought they were addressing farming of claimers, but farming of claimers was going to address itself based on not being able to get V1, V2, V3, V4 every 5 minutes, not having crown be as high as it was. and having less crown to begin with, 4.2 to 2.9, including more horses. Like it would have naturally solved for itself. So I think maybe restoring the crown ratio and reviewing entry fees across the board, but especially probably in claimers, probably makes some sense. Let's see what else we got here. Any other questions, or we will wrap soon? Thanks for showing up. Turned Taco Tuesday. We do appreciate new listeners, new stables. This stream always tends to be a little too highbrow at times, but if there are questions that you didn't ask here, I think anybody that's actively engaged in this chat tonight could certainly help you with those questions. But otherwise, if you want to shoot questions to us either on Twitter or add Stens31 on Discord, I can certainly happy to talk you through some decision points on what to build, where to build. I won't tell you what's a good price or a bad price, but I like helping out wherever I can. Ooh, good question here. Sours. What's your biggest fear as a high volume and high population stable? I mean, a global apocalypse type thing would be the biggest fear, right? But if we want to stick to what's in the realm of possibilities, I guess it would just be like some fundamental meta changes that couldn't have been foreseen. Like I think the way we built our stable was very intentional in that it built synergies. It built up from low grades, but it had high match horses. So we were going to benefit from the 1-of-1 meta because we had all the colts. We were going to benefit from the matches meta because we had all the A+ fillies. We've used S colts to breed less than anybody of our volume. We haven't used an S+ colt at all to breed. So like if they somehow made it so that inbreeding like completely went away, like we would probably be left in the dust. Like what we're trying to do is win in 10 months or 12 months. And that goes back to if I'm critical about benchmarks or other things, I can't be too critical, or I would have just taken the instant gratification of taking my S to S pluses immediately in every time. I would have taken everything to 1-of-1s because that has frankly produced the best racing results across the board. It just has. We're not taking that. We're trying to provide the colts that'll be the solution 6 to 8 months from now, which is foregoing winning now. Like I don't think we're even in the top 10 in Derby earnings, and we're actually racing a couple more horses than YSM Racing is. We're not racing balls to the walls like some of the stables are. And like I said, if only 6 of our horses are non-juveniles, the juvenile entry fees are appropriately lower than the non-juvenile entry fees are, but that kind of caps your upside if you don't have horses that can win graded stakes and you don't have horses that are racing in the non-juvenile races. But we certainly aspire to be there, and we will hold and race through the 3-year-old season on fillies, maybe even the 4-year-old season on fillies before too long. I think that's healthy. I don't think that's a sign that the market is not good. It just means if you have a good horse that you think is winning now, why am I giving up a bird in hand versus 2 in the bush type situation? And what is my biggest hope? Well, it's just, yeah, it's we're all taking a leap of faith at this point. And don't get me wrong, the team's been generous in crown allocations and giving back basically 100% of the fees for the first year. Like those types of things aren't lost on me. But we still, as large stables, as people that have been here since December, if not November of 2021, like we also took a very large leap of faith. So the hope is that the slow and steady and the volume actually pays off. Otherwise, we should have done what Eddie did and just buy the 10 best horses we could have bought instead of the 45 most synergistic pieces with a few top pieces than we did. We definitely are the long game. So that the biggest hope is that we're rewarded for that, whether that's partnerships with DraftKings or FanDuel or Twin Spires. But certainly some form of mainstream adoption is the biggest hope. Has there been any mention to lowering the breeding reports or a tier discount for crown owners or VIP owners? I don't know that they have. We haven't talked about it much recently. I think there's another subset of this of racing reports where I guess I'm not of the opinion that anybody has found tremendous value in the racing reports. So that's another area that if you want to provide value to having 20 PFPs or even 5 PFPs in that case is why I bring it up. There probably could be some work done there. But I don't feel like you should feel left out if you don't have 20 PFPs and you don't have breeding reports. I think people like myself, for sure, in-depth streams, go to our YouTube page. They're all there. I think most times I even label like comparing Shockwave to Prime Time and which one is actually better breeder based on the breeding reports run with 17 different fillies to try to create an isolated study of which one's actually better. I think individual horses can sometimes have a different result than what you would have thought based on the sire, but I think that's the exception, not the rule. But should the team evaluate trying to bring in more money from people that don't have 20 PFPs via breeding reports, via racing reports? Yeah, I think that would be great. And I would be totally fine if that money goes to them, if they're actually providing the value. Rude. How about the Packers versus Vikings game? Yeah, I mean, you guys all see how much money Eddie from Pocono Racing is winning in PFL, but I'd like to think it pales in comparison to how much he's winning off me just betting on Minnesota sports teams against the spread, and no more pointedly than thinking the Vikings were going to win this past weekend. So that kind of sucks, and our season's definitely over. And in a very Minnesota sports fashion, we didn't suck enough to get a top pick. We weren't good enough to actually do anything. That's how our sports teams have been, with the exception of the Wolves. They bottomed out. They just haven't been good on the top end. But yeah, Wild Vikings are always kind of that just interesting enough, but never good enough. All right. I think I've caught up to the chat. Again, I am at least the worst at following chat when I stream, so I appreciate everybody that's in here all throughout the day, whether that's Sours, Grandpa's Do It Better's been here, Peep's been here answering questions, Poker Player's been here mocking and ridiculing everybody. I appreciate you guys kind of carrying a conversation in chat if I don't get to it in time. And I appreciate absolutely everybody for tuning in. So, like I said, if you've got any questions for us, hit us up on Twitter or on Discord. And if you got subjects you want us to cover in depth or touch on briefly in future streams, let us know. As it stands, I do think our next stream will probably be Fool's Day, because my background is as a CPA. That tends to mean we should be busy in January and February. So I'm currently debating the merits of probably just waiting to stream until after work that Monday, as opposed to streaming right as Foals drop. So if you don't see me that morning, you don't see me announce that we're streaming at the crack of Fool's Day, I would anticipate streaming later in that day. So, all right, with that, we will wrap. Appreciate you all. Have a good night.